Hello, everybody. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. My name is Martijn Lofvers. I'm the Chief Trendwatcher of Supply Chain Media. I'm also the Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Movement, a European quarterly, and also the bi-weekly newsletter and a website and LinkedIn group, etc. I'm also the architect of the SCM IT software map. We'll explain later with a lot of software in supply chain field, also in sustainability. And that's the topic of the hour. We're going to talk about Scope 3 emission reporting and how to do that. So that's an interesting topic, a hot topic, I would say. And with me, I have a winner, I would say, of the European Supply Chain Startup Contest 2024. That's Oliver Ritzmann. He is CEO and founder of GRYN. So, Oliver, welcome.
Yeah, hey everyone, it's a pleasure to be on the call.
Yes, so maybe you can tell me a bit of your background. How do you came into this field?
Yeah, I'm actually a logistics guy. I'm always saying I'm born and raised in the logistics industry. And one day I was working at a 4PL division with a blue anchor, and we were doing procurement activities, and we were saying, hey, this is highly manual work, this can be done in a different way. And we did create the vision of the first virtual procurement manager. And that's when we started Shipstar, Luxembourg-based logistics procurement, scale up nowadays. And is, I would say, amongst the top three global logistics procurement tools. And but after a while, I recognized data is still a major challenge in the industry, because if you want to launch a tender, you need basically historical data sets. You need to know which lanes to tender, what are the volumes behind it. And it was always a big exercise. And you don't only need data for tendering or procurement activities, you also need data for sustainability. And I said, okay, how can we get this data, because companies are struggling. And we said, okay, let's build a carbon visibility and compliance platform that's green. And we are just collecting the data, validating and standardizing the data for our customers for compliant reporting.
All right. We'll talk about it extensively. Some from practical points for the audience. So you can chat among each other. So you see the chat functionality on the right-hand side. Below that, you see the Q&A functionality. So everybody is on mute, but you can interact with us, with Oliver and myself. So please use the Q&A functionality. You see the small Q&A text bubbles on the right-hand side. So these are the questions I will track. If the questions are in line with the conversation I will be having with Oliver, I will ask his questions immediately. If not, we will have a Q&A at the end. And after that, after 5 o'clock, we have an extra 30 minutes in the virtual lounge. So Oliver and I will sit down at table 1, and you can sit with us and have a conversation with us. As of now, I put off my camera so you can enlarge your screen, and then we'll follow up the conversation here. All right, so basically, what you see here is the topics CEOs are talking about in the last quarter. So this is an overview, an automatically generated overview by a German company, by the way. Basically, they scraped the transcripts of calls, analyst calls of Fortune 500 companies. They've done it in the last 4 years, I think, since the start of COVID. Basically, what you will see is these are the topics they mention in the calls, and what you see on the right-hand side, and it's a log scale. Supply chain is in there since the last 3 or 4 years. So CEOs are talking on supply chain and also on sustainability. So that's what you see here. And I highlight sustainability, supply chain, but also AI. CEOs, they talk about Gen AI, ChatGPT, AI. So ChatGPT was popping up 1 year ago out of nowhere because of the boom and the hype. So basically, this is what CEOs in the board are talking about in Fortune 500 companies, mainly American companies. Oliver, what is your take if you look at this overview?
Yeah, I fully agree, because the buzzword is resilience. Which came up during the last, let's say, 2-3 years. And we see just recently again a lot of supply chain interruptions in ocean freight and air freight. So this is really now a continuous topic, which is basically present, and we need to find solutions for it. And in addition, of course, sustainability is not a trend, it's an obligation.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why this is important. New regulations are coming up, and companies need to follow those regulations. That's the reason why those topics of sustainability, supply chain, and AI will be really present and leading for the next few years.
Yeah, good point. And we'll talk about it later, how we can use AI for this purpose, for sustainability in the supply chain. All right. So what I created in the last few years is this overview, and you see different kind of black swans, numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. So of course, COVID, and there were all kind of ripple effects. There were shortages, bullwhips, leading to recession, inflation, and you name it. You see it right here. Of course, in 2022, in February 24th, the war in Ukraine started, leading to all kind of disruption and mayhem. And CSRD, of course, for some companies, it isn't the black swan, but it is also a domino effect. The publicly traded companies in Europe will be obligated to comply to CSRD, but all their suppliers will also be, hit, I would say, by this CSRD compliance regulations. So that's also what I call a black swan. And of course, October last year, we saw what's happening in Gaza, leading to the blockage of the Red Sea, etc. So that's shifting. Also a black swan, I would say. And maybe because of that, a CSD, sustainability, was out of the picture a bit. But CSD is here to stay. So that's why I call it a black swan. And why I call it a black swan, I spoke to a Dutch transportation company a few months ago. They were coming to one of our events about transport visibility. They needed a solution. Why? Because one of their biggest customers is Mars, family-owned company, but one of their major clients is Ahold, the big retailer, and that's a publicly traded company, and they have to comply to CCD ruling. So Ahold is saying to Mars, "Give me scope 3 numbers," and Mars was saying to this Dutch transportation company, you are doing my transport. Give me the numbers because I have to because of Ahold. So how do you relate to all this, Oliver?
Yeah, I mean, we saw during the Ukraine war, when the war started, that people, of course, had different, let's say, topics because of cost increases, supply chain interruptions, and so on. But now the topic is back, and there is regulations, and companies need to follow it. But it's always early adapters or first movers and followers. So some companies are preparing well ahead, and some companies are just doing it last minute. This is always how it is. But nevertheless, as you said, the bullwhip effect, it's definitely even companies who are not obliged to fall under the CSRD. They are suppliers of big enterprises, and in order to fulfill the requirements of big enterprises like Mars, for instance, or other stock listed companies, they need to basically dig into the topic of sustainability. So they cannot get around.
No. All right. And we get to the topic how to get there and how to get to the right data and what do you need. So, like I said, I'm the architect at the IT Subway Map Europe. Here you see it. Maybe you have seen it before. So, all the kind of software types are in there, and the vendors like ERP, WMS, TMS, SNOP, and you name it. So you can find it online, also in an interactive way. And in the last few years, I added a supply line. First, it was sustainability. Maybe we renamed it in carbon accounting. So it's in the field, and you see different kind of players in there. You see the specialized one with just one subway station. So you see Carb, Me, and Sweep in there. But there's a whole world beyond that. I just had a discussion with Oliver. Maybe we should create a different kind of overview. So And all these vendors mentioned here are quite new. Some are just existing a few years, so they are quite big. Like Sweep, they raised 100 million euros already, so that's quite big. But they only exist for a few years. So Oliver, that's your field, but you agree that there is more beyond this.
Yeah, there's more beyond this because it's also a quite intransparent jungle. I mean, right now, less than 70% of our customers have actually a corporate carbon footprint solution. So a lot of customers are still puzzling the data together, and that's basically also a sign how big the market is. You know, a lot of companies are now looking for right solutions because they don't have the resources to assign data people, you know, who are just collecting, cleaning, and reporting data. So those processes need to be automated. And if you orchestrate the right tools, you know, you can fairly easy actually to build robust and automated carbon reporting processes.
Yeah, and to explain all this, you see on the upper left side, you see Transporion. They are coming from the TMS world, and now they added some functionality, just not to optimize on cost, but also on carbon footprint. So that's the reason why they are in this field, but they are not a specialized vendor like GRYN is or Sweep is, But then to explain how it interacts with all the other vendors. So
Yeah,
that's one thing. Yeah.
yeah, and Martin, carbon emissions, you know, will be in every solution in the future. You know,
Yes. Yeah.
so it will be in an ERP team as it will be the logistics service provider will be sharing it. There will be calculations tool and so every solution, procurement solution, will have carbon emissions. But the problem is how to basically streamline all that data at the
Yeah.
end.
Yeah, good point. Good point. And next to the IT Super Map, we also created since 2018 an overview of supply chain startups and scale-ups. This is the version of 2024. And to clarify, I have analyzed, I think, over 250 supply chain startups in Europe in the last years, and only the ones to maximum of 5 years old are visualized in the actual matrix. So that's the reason why not all 250 are on there, because some are older than 5 years. And as you can see on the left side in the green highlighted box, you see the carbon accounting uh, startups and scale-ups. They are in a certain field, but I think Oliver, you pointed out they are maybe not totally comparable to each other. So maybe you can explain that.
Yeah, it's first of all, what is the target group, you know, of the solution? Is it more the shipper? Is it more the logistics service provider? Is it
Hmm.
both? What's really the service offering? Are they covering the entire scopes, 1, 2, 3? Is it more specialized solution, which is covering on subscopes? You know, is the tool helping you with data quality, data collection, or is it giving you, let's say, recommendations on how to decarbonize? So there's really such a big playground.
Yeah.
But also, if you look at big enterprises, you know, like the Procter and Gamble's, the Nestle's, Unilever, yeah, you know, you name those super enterprises, let's say.
Yep.
They started 10 years ago with ESG, you know.
Yep.
Of course, they are looking now to go to the next level for other solutions than maybe a company who's fairly new in the reporting game. And that's the reason why there are also different solutions in the market.
Yeah, and it's a big market in the end. I think that all the companies around the world, if they are, if they want to survive for the next decade, they have to have some kind of solution on some kind of level, because it's required either by the EU or by your main customer or whatever. So I think all the companies in the end need to have some sort of data solution to provide this kind of data. And as I mentioned, um, I'm willing, and I'm trying to create another overview next to the IT Supermap and this future matrix on just what Oliver explained. There are different kind of tools. There is a product carbon footprint solution. There's a corporate carbon footprint solution. There's more like in a compliancy environment. So I want to get an overview, not so much in the qualitative which one are better. I don't to this qualification, but more, who should you consider and who's more in the same league or something like that, like clustering. So that's something we are going to hopefully publish in the next quarter. And I think that's not available yet, is it, Oliver?
No, I don't know such overview, but it's probably quite helpful, especially if you cluster that maybe by target group,
Yeah, yeah,
sustainability manager, procurement manager, transport manager or whoever, or CEO,
yeah.
what would be the tools they are actually looking at.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I'm still juggling with the axis, how to position them, but that we get there. Before we get to your solution and what your approach is, and I think that's quite unique. That's the reason why you won the European Supply Chain Startup Contest this year. Anyway, maybe to explain the difference between scope 1 and 2 and 3. Maybe you can do it. Probably you can do it better than I can do it.
Yeah, I will do it very briefly. So, scope 1 and 2 are really the indirect emissions you can control in your organization. And scope 3 are your indirect emissions, and transportation is part of it. If it's not scope 1, because it's your own assets, your own trucks, vessels, planes, for instance. So typically, transportation falls under scope 3, especially if you're a shipper or if you're a big freight forwarder. So, and scope 3 is really the most difficult scope to tackle, because you're depending on third parties to obtain information about the carbon emissions. And moreover, there are 15 subscopes of scope 3, for instance, employee commute, company cars, purchase goods and services, but also with scope 3.4 and 3.9 transportation.
Yeah. And if you are a manufacturing company, you have companies facilities in the middle. So you say Henkel, you have done a lot already with solar panels and windmill, etc. And maybe you have some own company of own vehicles. You have done stuff, but as you said, the scope 3, that's the scope 1 and 2 of your suppliers or your channels, so upstream or downstream, and that's the hard part. And
Yeah, and
as a
typically,
yeah.
typically the companies start first with scope 1 and 2,
Yep.
and then once they have a good overview, they move to scope 3. At least, the manufacturing business. Freight forwarders typically they start more with the scope 3, because what else they have? Maybe a warehouse, but offices, a little bit business travel, and so on. So
Yep.
it means scope 3 is by far, the biggest category.
Yeah. And even when you look at the Heinekens and the Unilever, they have done assessments about the sustainability footprint, either on water or carbon footprint, and 80% of the footprint related to sustainability is outside their company, either upstream or downstream. So basically, that is a challenge in any way.
Yeah, and typically companies do something, it's called double materiality assessment. So they basically check which subscopes are, let's say, relevant for them.
Yeah.
And logistics is ranking typically between or transportation between 1 and 8%. So companies who are more smaller, let's say having a turnover of less than 200 or 100 million, and the transportation emissions are just 1%. For them, it's rather not so relevant. But typically companies, big enterprises, as soon as it's, let's say, 3%, it's really relevant, and it's making an impact on the, let's say, entire value chain.
Yeah, and of course, within the supply chain managers or transport managers within the cargo owners are already focusing on minimizing transport costs and minimizing the transportation anyway. But now it's getting more related to the CO2 emissions. And by the way, of course, you have carbon emission, but you have other kind of emissions you see on top of that. So there's also kind of carbon focus funneling. Maybe only focusing too much on carbon. There's more about that. And what's your take? Is carbon the most important thing in supply chain, or is there more other things to focus on?
You mean the carbon emissions?
Water, other
Yes,
emissions.
since we are, of course, a solution who is really entirely focusing on transportation,
Hmm.
we of course say transportation makes a big impact. Even maybe it appears, on the overall, let's say, share only 5%. But you mentioned it on your own. We are enabler for digitization, So
Yeah,
once you have the visibility on carbon emissions, typically also your visibility on your supply chains and transportation network is increasing. So you can actually steer your supply chain activities based on that, and can not only reduce carbon emissions, you can also reduce transport cost.
yeah, yeah. And I do believe, because of the CSRD regulations, in the next years, the digitalization of the supply chain, information flows will accelerate. Because we need this kind of digital tools to get this reporting of carbon emissions, for one thing. But then really get to this, I would say, a valhalla of a digital supply chain, and that will bring other things, and then you can apply AI and that kind of stuff. But we'll get there. um, okay, maybe to dig into deep, tell me a bit more about GRYN.
Yeah, the thing is, companies need data, and I'm always saying no data, no sustainability. And a few years ago, people just thought, okay, good, we can push the topic to next year and then to the following year and so on. But now it's there. The Green Deal has defined the milestones, of the European Union, and in 2024, CSRD reporting became mandatory, and it will never go away because it's part of the filing of your annual accounts, of the tax declaration. So you need to do it, even if you have zero emissions in the future. You
Yeah,
still need to file that, and it need to be audited by an auditing firm. So, and this year, stock listed companies, for instance, they need to report, and as you said, Martin, more and more companies indirectly also then are obliged to report figures, even the reports don't need to be audited by the big auditing firms because they are below a threshold. But next year it will become more interesting, because then step by step 50,000 companies are affected just in the European Union, and other companies are launching or have already launched similar reporting requirements as well. And we see it in the shipping industry. For
yeah,
instance, as of January, we have the emissions trading scheme in ocean freight. So all the shipping lines calling the European Union need to report their emissions, and are basically obliged to pay, let's say, for carbon emissions. And the allowances are being reduced year by year. In addition, it's not here on the slide, but CBAM, the cross-border
yeah,
adjustment
yeah,
mechanism, has been launched. So
yeah,
another thing, so what cries for tools, for automation. 26, 27, the same, the game starts again for road transportation. And because of that, more and more standards are evolving, like the ISO, for instance, to make sure that data becomes, let's say, comparable in the market.
yeah. And you mentioned quite rightly, CBAM, the cross-border administrative methodology, was introduced October last year. That means if you are importing, I think, steel for Vietnam,
Yeah.
you have to pay a carbon tax if you are importing the steel into Europe. So basically, it's already happening. So the carbon taxation for some products are happening. So that's already hitting the supply chain and hitting businesses.
Yeah,
Uh,
also we are working on a CBAM product,
okay.
because a lot of our customers are saying, hey, would be great to have the solution in one tool, in one platform.
Oh, that's good to know. And by the way, you say, CSRD reporting means that some auditors like Deloitte, KPMG, whatever, will do this auditing every quarter. But it's not that they demand actual figures. they also want to know what is the improvement plan for next quarter or for the next year. So the companies have to comply by the CSRD regulations, and the accounting firms will do the audits. But basically, the analyst, the financial analyst, will ask CEOs and CFOs, okay, what are your data for this quarter? What are your plans for next quarter or next year? And how do you make sure that you will succeed in this, on this track to lower your carbon emissions? So all this promises for the next decade or to 2030 or 2040, whatever. Now you have to prove that you act upon it and that you show results. So that means a lot. So it's not your commitments anymore. It's like act upon your commitments.
Yeah, and you see on the next slide that it's actually a jungle, of regulations. And
Yep.
I mean, if you're working in sustainability, in the sustainability department, of course, you need to be kind of an expert of CSRD, the ESRS, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, SPTI, the different ISOs, behind it, and.
Yep.
For others, those are just buzzwords,
Yep. Yep.
And if you are like the procurement director or a sustainability person in the logistics department, then you cannot become an expert, on all different regulations, frameworks, and so on, because it's really a jungle. This is just an example. I don't want to touch it too deep, but the CSRD is just saying who needs to report when, but let's say the details are written in the ESRS,
Yeah.
But the ESRS is not inventing the wheel, So it's basically referring to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and the ISO 14064, And then basically every, let's say, department and company, and here, for example, for logistics, need to see, okay, which, let's say, E's, are relevant for my business, for, let's say, my department, what I'm doing,
Yeah.
And in addition, there are sector-specific standards. For instance, the ISO 14083, So it's basically, those regulations. If you have read once, one, it can be quite exhausting, and there are irregular updates. So having, let's say, a partner or solution who's guiding you automatically and not a consultant who's charging you a day like $2,000 euros and more is actually of value. And secondly, it's also a perfect case for AI to basically automate processes. You mentioned that you need to write decarbonization plans, So if you have the right data sets in place, you can write decarbonization plans, but you can also create your sustainability report, which you need to deliver annually just by AI.
Yeah. And basically, as preparation of this webinar, I know scope 1 and 2 and 3. That's what I know, but also scope 3.4 upstream, scope 3.9. I'm learning a lot also going through this and preparing for this. So that's good to know, because I'm also learning every time I see this kind of webinar and doing this kind of conversation. Maybe you can explain a bit more about your platform, your visibility platform. How does it work?
Yeah, I would say we are really kind of a pioneer in this field, because there will be more and more standards in the future. But right now, even maybe the ISOs defining, certain things, there are no standards really available. But in the future, everyone will exchange with anyone data on sustainability, that means every product will have a product carbon footprint. If you go to the grocery store and buy something, it will have product carbon footprint attached. If you buy a car, you can compare prices, but you can also compare let's say the carbon emissions, which were used for the production of the vehicle. It's like today on white goods, where you have the energy classes, if you go to a fashion store, this t-shirt, has a certain product carbon footprint. So there is a strong need of data exchange, and that's what the concept of GRYN is. we are consolidating data out of many different data sources, ERP systems, TMS systems, so-called secondary data sources. And we are collecting data from so-called primary data sources, meaning from your suppliers and carriers. And we are also basically validating the data on our platform. We are enriching it. We're doing quality checks, and we are basically standardizing the data sets for compliant reporting.
Yeah. And in the lower right, you see also vendors like Sea Routes. What kind of data are they providing to your platform?
Yeah, since we are carbon visibility and compliance platform, we are saying, okay, we are not a calculation provider. There are other guys in the market who did this for years already. Why should we take another ISO, GLEC, or other frameworks and build, let's say, a calculation engine? That's not our business, but you can, of course, calculate carbon emissions through our platform if your suppliers are not delivering those carbon emissions, to our platform. In this case, you have the freedom of choice, if you would like to use EcoTransit as premium partner, or if you use, let's say, other solutions which are hooked up to our platform.
Yeah. And by the way, like you mentioned, that there will be a QR code and you have a carbon overview of your product, where it be a t-shirt or whatever, a dishwasher. But then on the other side, you also see, and it's mandatory in the furniture, in the government environment, you will provide a product passport. Your whole bill of material, you have to be clear on that. Where is all the parts from a furniture chair coming from? If you want to have something sold to the Dutch government, you will have to provide a total clear product passport, not only of your tier 1, but also tier 2, etc. So basically, you will have a chair and you will know which part is coming from where. So you can scan it. And so next to a carbon passport, a carbon footprint of an individual product, you will see a product passport with the whole bill of material. And
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
yeah,
And we will tell you exactly where your data is originating from. How has it been calculated? What the emission factors are,
yeah,
and
yeah.
since data competence. As you said, it's an enabler for digitization. The entire sustainability topic.
Yep.
Um, there will be more and more primary data in the future. And if there's primary data, basically calculation providers will not have such relevance as today anymore, because you get the actual emissions reported from your suppliers.
All right. Maybe to dig deeper. So this is showing where the data is coming from. But what kind of data are you gathering, and where it's coming from, and how?
Yeah, we are actually imagine you're a big enterprise shipper, and you have a lot of logistics service providers, but you have no clue where to get the data from, because your organization is very fragmented in terms of IT infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
So the only way is actually to reach out to your logistics service providers and say, hey, you have better data than me. Please share the data with me.
Yeah.
A lot of companies did start this game, and it turned out that they have a lot of different Excel files, PDFs, even Word documents. It's strange, but it's the truth. And they said how to puzzle this together. One report is yellow, green, blue. It's a nightmare, and I need to clean it. And typically, companies are doing this only once a year, and once the reporting exercise is finished, they say, "Oh, tick in the box, done. Now the whole thing can wait for another year."
Mm-hmm.
But it's not actionable. If you don't get data frequently, it's not actionable. So you cannot turn your or decarbonize your supply chain. So what we are doing is, let's say, if it's a big company like Freudenberg Group, which has dozens of business units,
Yep.
they say, okay, all the logistics service providers should deliver data into GRYN, and we don't care about the data format. So we can actually accept any kind of data format by API, drag and drop, or they're just sending the data into our system. And by AI, the data is integrated and structured, and our customers get, let's say, one standard report out of it, which is fully compliant with the ESRS/CSRD, but also already completely in the structure of the new ISO 14083.
So you mentioned a lot of the times the word shipper, and I hate this word because shippers don't they see themselves as shippers. Mars is calling themselves as a brand owner or brand manufacturer. So shippers is what you mean is cargo owners. That could be manufacturing companies, wholesalers, or retailers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right. So that's one thing. I got a question from the audience. Are there any restrictions on the location or country of the company or office using the system? Is it possible to use it in Asia and Japan?
Yeah, actually, we are operating globally. We are operating everywhere in Asia, Australia, Mexico, US, South America, and Europe. But you see, of course, that the data competence, is different in certain geographical areas,
Yeah.
whereby companies in Europe, by the way, the data sharing is not the challenge. It's more the challenge of, let's say, emission calculation. So you can even go to, let's say, a Chinese logistics service provider, and they will say, hey, no problem, here's a report.
Yeah.
But there are also companies who said, okay, what do you want? Yes, we did hear about it, but we cannot provide it today. And we also do education and provide them infrastructure for it. And we said, okay, if you cannot provide calculations on your own temporarily, you can calculate the carbon emissions, let's say, through our platform, but we will develop you, together with our customer to a stage that you can deliver carbon emissions calculations and reporting fully compliant on your own.
Yeah, and because of the CSRD regulations, European companies, are forced to comply. So that's one thing. But if you look at these companies here on the slide, you see Maersk and FedEx, and Kuehne+Nagel, they are globally positioned. So they also transport goods from China to Europe, etc. So in the end, also all the logistics service providers and carriers, etc., delivering data from everywhere.
But of course, the top 25 global freight forwarders we have on the platform, but we also have like companies who have like one truck, or just doing intralogistics, shuttling, let's say, finished products to the distribution warehouse, So basically, we integrate all your logistics service providers.
Yeah. And by the way, that's one of the reasons you won the European Supply Chain Startup Contest this year. That's one of the convincing arguments for the jury of this year. But maybe you can tell me how to improve your carbon emissions. How do you do that?
Yeah, there are various ways. Maybe you switch on the next chart. A lot of companies say, okay, where to start, and what's the easiest way? Take spend data, from accounting.
Yeah.
So they just run a report, and it may work in some, let's say, categories better, in some not so well, because if you look at logistics, Corona crisis, for a container which did cost like $1,500 or $2,000 in the past, companies did pay 20,000 euros, So with this approach, your carbon emissions would go up and down, even you're still shipping on the same lanes with the same carriers.
Yep.
So spend-based really only gives you at the beginning a very, very rough indication, where you are. And then you get more and more granular. First, you can basically inject any kind of data. So you can start with minimum data sets. And we have a scoring model. So we will tell you how good you are, which data sets are missing so that you can continuously improve. And that's basically the green line. The better, your data is, the more you're moving to primary data sets and you meet the yellow line, the primary data. And then basically you can start optimizing your supply chain, for instance, fuel types or technologies like getting comparisons from our system fully automatically, diesel, biodiesel / HVO, LNG or electric. What would be the best actually technology or fuel type on this particular shipping lane, Because if you ship, let's say, something by truck 1,000 kilometers, in theory, an electric truck would make it, but in practice, not today, tomorrow, yes, but not today. So it would be probably better to start on those lanes first if you want to reduce your carbon footprint with HVO, if it's available in your geographical area. But I have actually read that already in the US, the sustainable fuel share in trucking is 50%. That's quite amazing. And I see a similar trend here. But another thing is look at your network once you have the data. Can you consolidate? Can you optimize routes? Because the best reduction is avoidance. So if you reduce mileage, it's the best reduction. You can do carrier switches and all of that. And we as GRYN are actually helping you to set your targets in our platform and measure your achievements against the target so that you really make sure that you meet your corporate near-term and long-term targets, because I think no one really wants to go to the CEO and say, hey, by the way, I missed my target.
Yeah, this is quite clear. Maybe you can explain the different kind of steps. You mentioned a bit, but maybe it's good to go through it. What are the actual steps, in which order you can take it?
Yeah. So actually, first of all, visibility, that's always step one, getting the data into the system. And that's what we do. We do the entire supplier onboarding on your behalf. It's kind of a hands-free process for you. We are automating the process so that you have continuously, the data for it. And by the way, once you have the data, you can also use it for different things: network engineering, procurement, and. And then it's the analytics, so where to focus on. So you typically run a hotspot analysis on our system, and we will tell you, hey, those are the biggest emitters, either by logistic service providers or by trade lanes. And then you can basically drill down and define initiatives and measure those initiatives against your targets. And then basically we will build a strategy for you, AI-based, to tell you exactly what needs to be done to meet your reduction targets. And in the controlling piece, we will tell you, hey, are you below target, above target, what needs to be done to meet the targets, but also is a projection, is your business growing, is your business shrinking, how do the carbon emissions actually develop if you move from default data to primary data, because in road freight, typically the emissions are going down with increasing data quality, but in ocean shipping, it's an opposite. So the more accurate the carbon emission data is, the higher the emissions, So this need to be forecasted, not that it's basically a year later, a big bang, in the organization because emissions are going up.
If you look at this roadmap, what do you think what is the hardest step to take?
I mean, the hardest step is actually the first step, saying, okay, I'm going to start now and creating visibility in there. Because it takes a couple of, let's say, weeks and months to get all logistic service providers on board. It's not, let's say, effort, but it's duration because, of course, stakeholders are on vacation and so on. But that's basically the first step. But for this, you have experts. We are doing the job. But actually, there's another point. We see that a lot of companies are starting without a strategy, that means they're booking sustainable fuels with ocean carriers, but it's not visible in the reporting. And secondly, how much sustainable fuel shall I book? 10 containers, 400 containers, 4,000 containers. So, and we bring it actually in alignment with your reduction targets, because there's always also cost of sustainability, and we tell you exactly how much initiatives, you really need to drive, first of all, then you can act on it, you can measure it, and you can prepare a plan for the future.
So I got a question from the audience. If we use a 3PL company who use a different kind of transport providers, carriers, can we also get an integration data from those 3PL? So
Yeah,
how do you do that?
yeah, that's what we do. And we also have a new project next year. It's basically a Europe-wide truck data space where we're going to identify every single vehicle in the European Union. And so basically we will ensure really end-to-end traceability and visibility of carbon emissions in the transportation chain.
Yeah. So you mentioned in the previous conversation, that the data collection is the hardest, and maybe um, that's referring to the mindset of companies, where to start, and that's there some companies are postpone it, but there's no time to postpone because the time is ticking away.
Yeah, we always say all it takes is sharing a supplier list with us, and then we get the process rolling. Because we are not a project, because a lot of companies are kind of still having a trauma from ERP system integrations, where they say, okay, this does cost a lot of money and resources, and it is not. A lot of customer of ours, they're starting, we know that corporate will knock on our door. We want to be prepared. And that's the reason why they say, okay, we sign up on GRYN, because if corporate comes, we already have, let's say, compliant data sets available.
Okay, maybe to dig deeper in the visibility part, maybe I can explain a bit more. How do you get it?
Yeah, so what we do is we actually gather shipment data and carbon emission data from logistics service providers, which are automatically integrated into our platform. We have monitoring systems which basically give alerts if data doesn't come in, so that we can trigger escalations.
Okay.
But with a lot of providers, we already have APIs, so there's basically kind of real time, data supply. Um, and we also have a logistics service provider sustainability assessment, where they also need to answer how they did capture the data, how they did calculate, did they use tools. We verify if the tools are approved. We capture the data sources, we capture the emission factors end to really make sure that we have a compliance report at the end, which can be handed over to the auditor for the CSRD audit.
Yeah. And what I see here, if you look closely, you see that, hey, Samantha, you're being addressed. So I think that means that this dashboard is being personalized for, in this case, Samantha.
Yes, absolutely.
So, so that's good to see. And if you dig deeper, if you look at your user interface, what I think is remarkable, also the overall data score, the 35%. What does that mean?
Yeah, so and that's also very important to mention, because there are different terms and some people are mixing them up.
Okay.
The greenhouse gas protocol is referring to primary data sets and secondary data sets,
Hmm.
meaning, data sources. So a secondary data source is your own system, meaning data from a TMS ERP system.
Hmm.
And primary data sources is supplier data. The greenhouse gas protocol and the ESRS is based on that, wants that you collect basically data directly from your suppliers. So, secondly, in the logistics industry, there are different terms, and there are the terms of default data, model data, and primary data. So that means primary data is easy. You have the precise fuel consumption, and you can basically precisely report the carbon emissions caused. But sometimes you work with subcontractors, or not all granular data sets are available yet. And then carbon emissions can be calculated based on assumptions, So you will have at the end default or model data. And we are actually measuring this. We are visualizing that, and we are also telling you which data fields are missing, and those you see in the middle, in order to improve your data score and basically move towards primary data. So basically, we accompany you on your journey to primary data.
Question for the audience: what standard algorithms do you use for the CO2 measurement?
I mean, there are two different things. One thing is CO2 calculations. So if a customer decides to calculate through our platform, it's fully ISO compliant 14083. And otherwise, if data is basically carbon emission data supplied to our system, then we are basically measuring against basically also industry norms. That means the ISO and the ESRS is used, let's say, for the validation of the data. And,
Okay.
and of course, crowd data, because we have a lot of data on our platform. And this is basically in the develop pipeline, AI fueled. So we can basically also do automated validation checks, if the data is really trustworthy we have received.
Okay, makes sense. Maybe you can talk about some actions. So what are the actual insights you are providing?
Yeah, one thing is, of course, knowing your carbon emissions. I'm always saying, hey, how much emissions do I produce as a person? So if I don't know, it's not present. I will not do anything. So one day I did calculate how many emissions I produce by going or commuting to work and back home. So, and I said, okay, now I have more motivation to take my bicycle. Unfortunately, I'm just riding it if the weather's nice, but I've calculated I can actually reduce 1 ton per year. And if you look that every person in Europe has between 10 and 15 tons per year, causing emissions, then it's could be 10% you're saving already. And that's the same in business. You can quantify it and then basically looking, okay, what can I actually do in order to reduce now my carbon emissions? And for that, the system is going to deliver suggestions. And those suggestions you can then validate with your business and kick off initiatives with your logistics service providers, and also measure in our platform if those emission initiatives did kick in.
And when I look at this example, you see Lufthansa, Cargolux, and Air France KLM. So you see different mileage, but also you see different CO2 footprints. So although you are flying in your goods, there are also decisions to make on that area.
Yeah, there could be green carrier options that we say, okay, hey, take rather this airline because they have a direct flight, so it's a shorter distance, and they have maybe more fuel efficient planes, on this particular, let's say, service.
Yeah. Okay. You see the colored framework on the right hand side. Here you have a closer look. Can you explain what this mean? This is overview.
Yeah, this is a typical hotspot analysis because we are not a friend of an overloaded dashboards, with like 20, 30 KPIs or charts, and no one is really reading it.
Mhm.
So we make it really simple. So we show in a tree chart where your biggest emissions are. In this case, in US, from US to Germany, there are the biggest emissions. And you could also drill down then, and we will tell you which port pairs, for instance, which mode of transport relate to that, which logistics service providers or carriers. And then basically you can start based on that working out reduction programs.
So yeah, it's quite clear. So we're getting to the end of our webinar, but what I suggest, the world is getting more and more complex. So, like I started out in this webinar, we see all kind of ripple effects, bullwhips, domino effects, that kind of stuff. So basically, my suggestion would be, please visualize your whole ecosystem, not in a linear sense like raw materials, manufacturing, distribution to your customer or your consumer anyway. So visualize it like this. We have done this for household products, the whole ecosystem. So you see from the upper left the raw materials to the lower right, you see the customer segments. You see the different arrows visualizing the flows, flow of goods, data flows, financial flows, etc. So basically map out your whole ecosystem. So that's to make it clear. So basically you map out all your important stakeholders, and it's in your field. And there are maybe more than one logistics service provider, etc. So that's the first start to make a better overview of your whole ecosystem. And then talking about sustainability, where are the biggest waste, or where are the biggest emissions, and then you can relate to that. So that's my point. Oliver, if you look at this, what are your recommendations if you look at this kind of visualization on a total ecosystem?
Yeah, I'm saying make first an assessment, where are your biggest emissions, prioritize it, and then, get started on it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and Oliver mentioned the whole roadmap. So visibility is one thing, but I think if you don't know where all your suppliers, subcontractors, tier 2, 1 and tier 2, etc. Most of the companies don't know where their tier 2 suppliers are, who they are, where they are, how far away are they. So they have to go to their tier 1, their primary suppliers, to ask them, what are your suppliers, and where are they located, etc. So if you don't have an overview in that sense, you don't know what your global footprint is and where to start with. So that's the thing.
That's a very
Yeah,
good point, because a lot of companies indeed they believe they know where their shipping volumes are,
yeah,
but often they don't really know, and there are also, let's say, divisions who don't share any data today. So basically, by building visibility through sustainability, you get all the data and you understand basically your logistics slash transportation better. You know how many suppliers you have engaged, and this will actually then turn into green procurement processes, or I always say responsible sourcing processes, that you say, okay, now I need to look how responsible are really my logistics service providers, what options can they, let's say, deliver for, let's say, more, let's say, eco-friendly deliveries, and then I can include that in my tendering process, in my award of business process, and basically, proving, let's say, the reduction of carbon emissions in the supply chain.
so and we have all seen examples in the press where some journalists have dig in, where is my mobile phone coming from, and parts are going ship from one place to another, from Taiwan to China and back, etc., and then to Europe, whatever. So most products are traveling all around the world before they get into your hands. So we have all seen this examples of a T-shirt, of a mobile phone, or a car, and Airbus. If you took a look into it, where all the parts that come from all around the world before it's assembled in either France or Germany, these things will become more transparent,
Yeah.
and companies like the Nikes of the world, they are due publish where are their factories and where stuff coming from. But in the end, it's a world beyond that.
Yeah, fashion or certain products are very, very complex, of course, because you have so many different suppliers to create a final product.
Yeah.
We have an interesting customer case in the tea industry,
Hmm.
So we are actually capturing the data from the delivery from the farm to the port, from the port to the global factories, from the global factories to the global markets, and from the global markets, the distribution to the final end, let's say, customers. So that's quite interesting, and that really brings real visibility in your business.
And even that, that is quite straightforward supply chain, I would say.
Yeah.
When you look at some industries, when you go, you harvest and then you package, and then it goes from one continent to the other before it get to your store. That's sometimes amazing about that.
Look at the fashion or automotive industry, where we have thousands of parts, which need to be assembled, and then as we said, tier 1 to 3, so it's quite complex, but it's a process, and for that, really data exchange platforms are a great thing, and we see it already in the automotive industry, because we have quite a lot of automotive industry, and we already see all the relations, And through our platform, you can then authorize data sharing, so that data can be shared completely autonomously with any party once you have authorized that.
So if you look at this is the ecosystem of household products, but there are adjacent ecosystem like cosmetics, etc., and there are separate one about automotive, etc. So in the next decade, we will see more data sources like this on a meta level. We have to wrap up. Maybe a final question: can you compare the data to best-in-class companies, for example? Or are we not there yet?
No, we are not there yet, because for that we need data, more data, and we have already a lot of data. But it's more first the comparison against emission factors. We can also run already benchmarks, but we don't do best-in-class companies yet. So this will possibly come next year, so that we say, okay, you're really a sustainability leader here, and we will start actually with road freight first. And then ocean freight, most likely. That's the roadmap.
Okay. Thanks. There are more questions, but we are already running out of time. So if you have more questions, if you want to sit down with Oliver and me, please join us in the virtual lounge. So we have a further conversation. So here's the link to other information, maturity matrix, SCM IT supermap, and more on GRYN. So you can find it here. So with that, I would like to thank the audience for the questions, and Oliver, I'd like to thank you for participating in this very insightful webinar. Thank you.
Yeah, enjoyed the session. Thanks.
All right, like I mentioned, we will be there the next 30 minutes, so you can sit down with us, or you can join us in a webinar next week. Then I will talk more in depth on the IT submap map, what's happening, how to create a resilient IT portfolio, and how to handle and import all the things about AI, Gen AI, and that kind of stuff. So thanks for now, and I say goodbye, and I hope to see you in the lounge or either next week. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Bye.